Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to Coffee Talk! Alright, is it the end of the world as we know it, or just the end of America? People have been having apocalyptic dreams. Dreams of tsunamis hitting both coasts. Dreams of nuclear war, chaos in the streets. If you just Google it or go onto YouTube and do a search, you will find that there's an enormous amount of people having these post-apocalyptic type dreams. Now, for the most of my life, I believed that the Lord was coming back in my lifetime. Now I'm not so sure, partially because I've been really examining the evidence, the biblical evidence, and I tend to lean towards preterism. But the biggest thing that dispensational, left behind type of theology, I didn't call it theology, it's almost like a fiction, it's almost like fantasy writing, but gloom and doom is being predicted by Bible prophets, and the news tends to lean in that direction. And I myself flew off the handle when the thing started on October 7th, when everything started to come apart in Israel. I said, this is it. This is the beginning of the tribulation. I'm not so sure. And one of the main reasons is because I myself have been having these post-apocalyptic dreams. If the Lord's coming back in my lifetime, it's going to be much later than I thought, according to these dreams I keep having. Now, these dreams are pretty intense, and they typically last all night long. I can get up and go to the bathroom, go back and go to sleep, and the dream continues. And so I thought I would share with you on my Coffee Talk my post-apocalyptic dreams that I've been having. So in the first one, I'm living here where I'm at in Oklahoma. It's somewhere between 15 and 20 years in the future because I'm in my 70s. And let me tell you, in the dream anyway, I'm a pretty fit 70-something, which doesn't surprise me because I'm a pretty fit late 50s person. And but the world was very different. Even though I was living in the same place, the towns around me were the same towns, the life in America had drastically changed. I was under the impression in the dream that we were involved in a long-going war, a war that had been going on for years and years. And it had taken a huge effect on the lives of the people around me and on my life. And for the first thing you got to know is it was definitely a post-EMP dream. That no one's running around in their cars, there weren't any cell phones, and life was very regimented. There was transportation in the form of older school buses, which makes sense from an EMP perspective, since a lot of your older school buses, even ones being produced more recently, are carbureted. They don't have fuel injection. There's not a lot of electronics to them, and they're pretty easy to get up and running. And these buses were painted white, and they had lettering on the side that said something very strange, because all the buses had the same logo, the same writing, and they were clearly marked as the Old Man's Fireman Brigade, or the Old Man's Fire Brigade, which sounds like a weird thing. But as it turns out, I was in the Old Man's Fire Brigade, that a lot of people call the Old Man's Bucket Brigade. And one of the chief things I noticed right off the bat in this alternative universe, this future world, was that there were no men under the age of about 50 or 55. That most all of the men that were there were my age. There were a few men, most of them were badly disabled or mentally deficient, that were younger. All of the men that ran our country were all over the age of 55. There were also no young women under the age of 30. That all there was old men, women 30 and older, and children under the age of about 14 or 15. And I didn't see the process, but it's like in the dream I was aware that everyone had gone off to war. That when children reached about the age of 14 or 15, they were taken from their parents and put into military service. The only ones that were there, the only women that were there that were all over 30, all had children. So it was either women over 50, women 30 to 50 who had children that they were raising, and old men. And so one of the things that was a quirky part of the dream is that I was still a pretty fit old man, and the majority of people around were women. The women outnumbered the men a great deal. A lot of women and smaller children. And so being one of the few men who still looked kind of fit and capable, I got hit on by women everywhere I went. And I guess I was too old for that or had enough of it. And so I was constantly rejecting women and found it quite annoying that I was constantly being flirted with and hit on by these women that were everywhere. Most of them, 40, 50, 60 years old. And back to the old man's fire brigade. I knew the old man's fire brigade was a thing because I was in it. And at the time, I was forced into it. I didn't want to join, but there wasn't any civilian government. The entire government seemed to be ran by some kind of civil defense authority. And it was mandatory that the old men who didn't go off to fight joined the old man's fire brigade and operated as firemen, policemen, guards, bus drivers. The buses that drove people around, the old school buses, were driven by old men. For the most part, women too, but mostly old men. And it must have been not a real politically correct time. The whole thing felt like World War II, right? That feeling that my parents told me about, that what the world was like with rationing, a lot of government control. Everybody was doing their part, right? It was an ongoing community-wide war. Now, whether this was a foreign war, or it could have been a civil war, and it was being fought someplace else. Here in Oklahoma, there wasn't any war, but I was being trained in the old man's fire brigade to be a guard of a natural gas pump. And that was one of the things that I felt like there was propane. And I started to think that maybe the buses operated on propane, which is an easy conversion if you know what you're doing and you have the proper parts. And so they were training me in the use of a shotgun, which was remedial reading, and I was quite bored. I know that it wasn't a bean dream of the past, a World War II type dream, even though the cars were all older. There wasn't many cars on the roads, but the ones that were there were simple older vehicles, pickup trucks and box vans and school buses. And mostly they were just used in work. And but I know it was modern times because I was wearing the uniform, which was modern military BDU. The only thing that was slightly different, and that maybe the newest ones are this way, is that instead of having an open collar that you buttoned up for the overshirt, it was a linked collar with a Velcro band that went tight around your neck like this. You put it on and it went up to here, and you tightened it around with a piece of Velcro. And but I remember being quite bored in the classes because they're teaching me shotgun safety, and I could have talked to class, but I kept my mouth shut. I do recall being in a bar and grill. There was still small businesses ran that would feed you, or you could get a drink or whatever. It was a small tavern type place. And I remember being in there after work, after I came from this training session. And of course, this is where I'm getting hit on by women. And then a young man who's clearly not right in the head. He clearly was overlooked for combat duty because he wasn't right in his head. And he starts goading me and making fun of the old man's fire brigade. And I know they couldn't have been too woke. It had to be, more of a conservative thing in charge. Or they wouldn't have called it the old man's fire brigade. It would have been the old people's fire brigade. Or the extinguishing of flammables by senior citizens. But I'm in this bar and grill trying to eat my food, and that was another thing. The food was all canned or dehydrated. It was no fresh food, and I was kind of picking at it. And this young man who wasn't right in the head starts goading me and making fun of us and telling us we're all washed up. All you old men fire brigade think guys, all you old fire bucket men think you're in charge of stuff. And I was about to hit him. It was just I'd had enough of him. And all around me were women talking me down. They were saying, just leave him alone. You know he's not right. Just let it go. Just let it go, Sage. You know he's not right. Just leave him alone. You know, and he'll go away. Just leave him alone. He's harmless. And so I was choking that down. And that's the extent of the dream. A post-apocalyptic, post-EMP time of extended war, about 15 to 20 years in our future. Now, having said that, just last night, I had another post-apocalyptic dream. And this one was also very different. Now, I didn't live here anymore, and I was much older than 70-something. I was probably in my 80s. And I remember by then, I kind of felt feeble. When I was in my 70s, I felt like I could still whoop that young man if he didn't treat me with respect. I remember my mindset in the second dream when I'm in my 80s is I'm a little more feeble of body, and I'm a little more concerned and careful. But I'm not living in the house I'm in now. I'm living in a bigger farmhouse. And there's several young women, probably grandchildren age or even great-grandchildren age, that were living there with me. And people were started coming over to our house all the time, probably because of the granddaughters, right? But from my perception in the dream, they were also coming there for entertainment. The main thing was there was no internet, there was no phone, there was no television, there was no radio. Everybody just worked like they did back in the old days, and they were bored out of their minds. So people started coming over just to hear me play a little music and tell a story of how life used to be. And this starts to grow, and everyone came there for the most part on foot. There were vehicles, but you rarely saw anyone ever driving them, and they were reserved mainly for work and to move large things and objects. And I remember sitting around a fire barrel telling stories and drinking coffee with some men, and I was telling them stories of the old days. And I just happened to mention, I got an old shotgun I'd kind of like to maybe trade out of. What I found interesting is people still used money. They still used regular cash currency. And so I just casually mentioned to this one guy, and a few hours pass, and we're inside the house. And there's a man there that you could tell was older, like not as old as me, but in his 60s or 70s, and he remembered the old ways too. And his clothes made me think at one time he'd been an important person, and he just kept good care of his clothes all these years, because he was wearing, a factory made suit and overcoat, but it was, well worn and not freshly pressed, right? And people start talking that they're hungry. So one of the young girls that was living there with me, I'm presuming it was a granddaughter, starts cooking on a 2-burner Coleman stove, which is the same 2-burner Coleman stove I currently cook on and have been for the last several years. And so they start frying up hamburgers, and there really wasn't anything else but hamburgers. And that would make sense too in Oklahoma. If we were in that kind of post-apocalyptic world, the main food you would have would be beef. The grass here, as long as it hasn't been contaminated by nuclear fallout, will always support the raising of cattle. It's the old buffalo run, and the natural grasses here will definitely support bovine. And so we seem to have plenty of meat. And I do know this, we had a refrigerator and it ran on propane. But all of the lights in the house were either propane lanterns or oil lamps or lanterns of some kind. There was no electricity. But I did have a propane powered refrigerator. And so they start cooking for him, and the old guy in the suit says, I hate to just take from you. I'd like to pay you for this. And I thought, what I need is a tip jar. And so there's a glass jar that I bought to put flowers in years ago that now is where I put my spatulas and spoons and things in on my cabinet. And And I remember going out to the barn of this house thinking, I remember that glass vase would make a great tip jar. So I know that I was feeble because I was standing on a chair and I was scared to death. I was going to fall on this chair reaching up on this top shelf, and I finally managed to finally get down the glass jar, the tip jar. And I'm taking it back to the house, and by now it's starting to get dark. And I'm thinking these people that are here all need to go home now. But people would come there because they were just mainly bored. They were looking for some place to congregate, somebody who had some talent. I remember thinking in that moment, a good country band from the old days could come through here and just clean up. Just people would come from miles around to hear him play, because people were coming from miles around just to hear my old, grumpy self play and sing and tell stories. And, there was just nobody that could make anybody laugh. And entertainment, they were craving it. They were that generation that was alive. I was under the impression that, when they were young, they had grown up in this environment where every moment of every day had multiple layers of entertainment going on all the time: radio, TV, internet, your phone, games, video games, and just the world at your fingertips. And that vacuum that was created by the EMP, killing all of that entertainment, just made it so people were starved for it. And I remember thinking, as I'm carrying the glass jar back to the house, how the gypsies used to travel around and how they kind of gave birth to the modern carnival, where they would blow into a small town, a small community of farmers who were bored to death, and they would entertain them with music. Of course, there would be dancing girls and probably prostitution, and mixing amongst the crowd were pickpockets, and the gypsy men would put on prize fights for entertainment. People would bet, and they would get them all good and drunk, and then the pickpockets would go around fleecing the remaining money left on the drunk townspeople, and then they would leave before the sun come up, and with the local sheriff going, "Hey, these gypsies ripped us all off." And I remember having that complete thought. I'm telling you, these dreams are detailed. They're in color. And it's one of the things that's so disturbing about them, is that the dreams are so vivid. They feel so real. And it feels like our future. And so I'm coming up to the house with this glass jar, thinking about gypsies and the good old days of having a good country band, when this truck comes barreling down the dirt road and up my driveway so fast. It was like a 1982 or 1983 Ford short bed pickup. And it pulled up in my driveway so fast that it slammed on its brakes, and gravel flew, and it just bumped my car. It didn't smash it, it just bumped it. And I remember thinking, I'm going to have to get some security up in here. But yet at the same time, there was this sense that everyone got along, that there really wasn't a criminal element, that most everyone was harmless and just leaning on each other for life and for sustenance and for entertainment. And these two black men come barreling out of this truck. And I'm a little disturbed, but yet not like I would in modern times. Like, I didn't think they were there to kill me and rob me. I didn't really have anything. And my main thought was, what are these probably drunk on moonshine men doing driving this car around? And you hardly ever seen vehicles, so the whole thing set me aback that there was a truck coming up my driveway anyway. And these two black men jump out of the truck, and they say, "Hey, I heard somebody was selling a shotgun." And I remember thinking to myself, wow, word of mouth around here travels faster than the internet used to. I wouldn't have got that kind of response in the old days. But apparently, if you had guns, you were hanging on to them. And anybody that was willing to sell one, they were more ready and willing and quick to respond. Because I just mentioned that at the fire barrel a few hours earlier, and now here are these two men wanting to buy or trade for my little pump shotgun that I was going to let go of. And I think I was letting go of it because I couldn't really shoot it anymore. I was just getting a little too weak for something with that much power, and I tended to lean towards lighter recoiling rifles and handguns. So I didn't need it, and I knew there was a need for them out there and people wanted them, so I was willing to let go of it. So those dreams have made me start to believe that I'll probably live a long life, which makes a lot of sense. My mom is 91 this year. She'll be 91 this August. And my sister, Debbie, is she'll be 69 in February. She's in perfect health. My mom battles a little with her health, but not enough to stop her from working. She'll bounce into the hospital, have a crisis. Everybody thinks she's going to die. Then she'll spring back, and before you know it, she's down there at McDonald's making burritos. They call her the burrito machine. I can't remember how many she can make in make 120 in an hour, I think is what she said. So between the dream and the longevity in my family, I've kind of stopped thinking that this is the end of the world as we know it. That rather, this is probably the fall of an empire. You know, empires come and go, and every time an empire falls, everyone thinks it's the end of the world. Everyone thinks they're living in the end times. People have thought they were living in the end times since the time of Jesus. The disciples and apostles thought that Jesus' second coming was imminent, that it would happen in their lifetime. And so everyone thinks they're the final generation. But what if history just continues to march on? What if the preterists are right and Jesus is waiting to return until we get our personal stuff together and get control of this planet and get people lined out living the law of love? Maybe this EMP brought us closer to living the law of love, because I felt less threatened. I felt like people were generally easier to get along with, and were just wanting some interaction, some companionship, and some entertainment. Because apparently, without all of these electronics, life is really boring. And everybody was bored to tears. Bully flapped his ears to that. So tell me what you think in the comments. Are we living in the end times, or are we just witnessing the fall of the American empire? Will there be an EMP, and what will that look like? Did I just have too many beans with my tacos last night? Because I did have beans and tacos, so it could have been Bean Dream last night. Maybe I'm having these dreams on every night I make tacos. I don't know. Tell me, is it a bean dream? Did I get a prophetic glimpse into the future? Is it this a fall of an empire, or is it the end of the world as we know it? Is the second coming imminent, or will it happen in some future time, long after all of us are long gone? So tell me what you think in the comments section. Don't forget to support the channel. If you enjoy these videos, know that they're because you support me. I don't get any money from YouTube. I'm not working except at this job, working on these videos. And I don't require much because I live a simple life. Maybe I'm getting ready for the EMP ahead of time. I almost live like we've had an EMP already out here in the sticks with my bullhounds. So don't forget to support the channel. If you enjoy these videos and you want to keep them coming, leave something for me there. There's a link in the description to PayPal, to Cash App, to my post office box. And I love and appreciate all of you, and we'll see you next time on Coffee Talk.